In January of last year, I ended up in the hospital with a broken spine and a few other injuries. I didn't need surgery, but I had to lie still for a month. Imagine, breathing was painful and unpleasant because of broken ribs and bruised lungs. Moving my legs was even more painful, and every awkward movement sent wild pain through my spine. Painkillers helped, but their composition. They said it was a mix of acetaminophen, diphenhydramine, and God knows what else. The addiction to that stuff was terrible. There was an old man next to me. When they stopped giving him painkillers, he writhed in pain. He had a complicated fracture of his left leg, but his head hurt. That old man was the only one who left the ward alive while I was there. Over the month, 6 more people were brought into my ward, but they all died. One of them came in with multiple stab wounds, so his death was expected. But men with hernias and fractures died from unknown causes. Naturally, no one told me the cause of death, and that made me even more scared. The old man said that at night someone would walk around, as if in high heels, not shuffling, but tapping, and sometimes there was the sound of a gurney. You can't imagine what I felt when they carried bodies out of the ward in the morning. Later, a cleaning lady told me that people had been dying in that ward like flies even before I arrived, and that the ward was generally considered unlucky. A week after I was admitted to the hospital, I came up with the idea of refusing painkillers to avoid getting addicted. The first 2 or 3 days were okay. As long as I didn't move, the pain didn't bother me too much. Then the pain started tormenting me at night, so I mostly slept during the day. And that's when it all began. One night I heard footsteps, quiet, slow, and rustling. They were heading towards my ward. Holding my breath, I looked at the door and felt a sharp pain again. I was lying with my head towards the door, so turning my head caused pain. The footsteps drew closer, and the nearer they got, the more terrified I felt. But then the door slightly opened, and the duty nurse peeked in to check if everyone was asleep. I felt a wave of relief. Before I had been asleep at night, so I didn't know she did nightly rounds. I calmed down and lay there. Then I heard the sound of a gurney. I thought they were bringing in a patient and fell asleep. In the morning, I found out that no one had been admitted during the night. Well, I thought maybe the nurse was moving something. Another night, the same footsteps, the same nurse. When the nurse came in, you had to close your eyes and pretend to be asleep, or else you get an immediate shot of a sedative that gave you a terrible headache. And then I heard the gurney again. There were 3 of us in the ward at that moment, and one bed was empty, so they could have been bringing in a patient. The gurney's clattering grew closer, and then I was genuinely scared. Amid the sound of the gurney, I heard the tapping of heels. I would have run away if I could. The gurney clattered, and the heels clicked. Then everything went quiet. Suddenly, the door opened and the gurney rolled into the ward. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, but the gurney stopped between my bed and the one next to me. The tapping heels approached me, and I felt someone's breath on my face. Something touched my hand, and I barely flinched.
"You're not asleep,"
the voice whispered, but it felt like it was composed of voices and sounds, including screams of terror and sobs.
"I know."
Whatever was touching my hand now touched my shoulder and my face. I kept pretending to be asleep, and that probably saved my life. The bed across from me creaked. My neighbor must have woken up. "Hey, who are you?" That's all he managed to say. The tapping moved towards him. There was the sound of a body falling, and a few minutes later, the gurney rolled out of the ward. I think I either fainted or instantly fell asleep from the shock. In the morning, they found my neighbor dead, and I was moved to another ward. After that, I heard the sound of the gurney about twice a week at night. It passed by my new ward, and each time I curled up, praying it wouldn't come in. The fear that gripped me was almost paralyzing, and every time I heard the footsteps in the gurney, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I tried to talk to the doctors and nurses about what I was experiencing, but they just brushed it off as hallucinations caused by my pain and the medication withdrawal. They assured me that there were no nightly rounds by anyone other than the nurses, and no gurney was moved at those hours. But I knew what I heard, and the terror I felt was all too real. A few days after my move, I overheard a conversation between 2 nurses outside my new ward. They were talking about the old man who had survived his stay in the same ward where I had experienced those terrifying nights. According to them, he had mentioned something similar about the footsteps and the gurney. They dismissed his claims as the ramblings of a man in severe pain. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I started paying more attention to the other patients' stories and the hospital staff's gossip. I learned that the ward I had been in had a dark history. Years ago, it was used as a temporary morgue during a hospital renovation, and since then, patients admitted to that ward had a higher-than-average mortality rate. There were whispers among the staff about a nurse who had died tragically in that very ward, and some believed her restless spirit still haunted it, searching for the patients she had lost. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that what I experienced was real. The footsteps, the gurney, the eerie voice, it all pointed to something supernatural. The old man who survived, the others who didn't, the inexplicable deaths. It couldn't all be a coincidence. One night as I lay in my new ward, I heard the familiar clatter of the gurney passing by. My heart raced, but this time, instead of curling up in fear, I forced myself to get up. Moving was excruciating, but I had to see it with my own eyes. I hobbled to the door and peeked out into the dimly lit hallway. There I saw it, an old rusted gurney being pushed by a shadowy figure in a nurse's uniform. Her face was obscured, but the tapping of her heels echoed eerily in the corridor. I quickly closed the door and backed away, my mind reeling. There was no denying it now. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't losing my mind. The hospital was haunted, and that ward in particular was cursed. The next morning I demanded to be discharged, despite the doctor's protest that I wasn't ready. I couldn't stay another night in that place. I left the hospital and never looked back. The experience stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unseen horrors that might lurk in places, meant for healing. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the distant sound of a gurney and the tapping of heels in my dreams.